Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First, before I start my reading, I just want to make a short announcement since I organize these readings, and I wanted to thank the people who've read in the readers over the last year or longer for reading, making very interesting readings, and they've really been fun. And I also want to say that I'm always looking for new people or new readers from people who've read before. So if any of you have things you'd like to share or interested in sharing, please let me know. And I know my address is in the white book. So this is an advertisement for more readers. So please let me know if you can read, because I have some openings coming up. So I need someone. Okay, so I was saying to people here that we subscribe to The Economist, and for the most part, they're talking about economics and policies, and it's always rather grim and depressing. But the one section in the magazine that I find quite interesting and also not depressing is their small science and technology section. And I'm going to read a couple of pieces from the science and technology section of recent economists. So the first one is called A Genetic Tweak That Makes Soy Plants 20% more productive. It improves their ability to photosynthesize. Plants are layabouts, and as such, easily underestimated. They seem simply to sit there, growing or dying according to the roll of the meteorological dice, the appetites of herbivores, the caprice of pests, and the skill, if they are cultivars, of their attendant farmers and gardeners. But their passivity is superficial. On the inside, plants are endlessly active. Their sedentary way of life requires it. They must continually adapt in their biochemical processes to changes from which animals can simply run, swim, slither, or fly away. Understanding how plants do this is scientifically fascinating. It also offers the possibility of changing not just the look and size of the members of the vegetable kingdom, as humans have been doing for 10 millennia, but also their inner workings. The potential such change offers is demonstrated spectacularly by a study published recently in Science by Stephen Long of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and his colleagues. Dr. Long's team used genetic modification to improve the way soya plants deal with fluctuating illumination, therefore increasing yields dramatically. They did this, moreover, not in a laboratory, but in a field. Plant breeders get excited by yield increases of 1 or 2%. Most of Dr. Long's strains saw augmentation of more than 20%, and one improved by a third. Those sorts of numbers could make a big difference in a world with a growing population and which is at risk of losing significant amounts of farmland to climate change. Soybean maverick. That plants have something to fear from fluctuating sun and shade might sound surprising. Solar cells, which like leaves, work by energizing electrons using sunshine, produce more energy in bright light and less when shaded, without any fuss. But biological photosynthesis is far more sensitive than photovoltaic response of semiconducting silicon. When a shaded leaf is suddenly exposed to the sun, the photosynthetic machinery within it risks blowing a fuse. And as the sun traverses the sky and the wind blows, such transitions from shade to sun and back again are the norm, not the exception. Plants have therefore evolved various safety valves to remove energy from their photosynthetic apparatus and dissipate it as heat. But clever as they are, these valves are a bit slow to respond. In soya plants, it takes minutes for them to ramp up after a leaf finds itself in full sunlight, and longer still for them to turn themselves off when shade returns. When they turn on too slowly, the light they receive in the interim has time to overexcite and damage the photosynthetic machinery. When they are too slow to turn off, diffuse illumination that a shaded leaf might put to good use gets wasted as heat instead. Dr. Long and his numerous lab mates have worked long on improving the safety valves involved. Their main idea is to get the relevant valves to turn off more quickly. The longer the protective effect persists after a leaf has been shaded, the less photosynthesis it ends up doing. In 2016, they reported putting extra copies of 3 genes identified as crucial to this process into tobacco plants, which are easier to modify than most crops. The leaves of the modified specimens returned to peak efficiency much more quickly in the shade than did normal tobacco leaves. The modified plants also grew a good bit more strongly than unmodified controls. But there were doubts as to quite why that was, and whether similarly modified seed crops would increase their photosynthetic gains or invest their photosynthetic gains into growing more or bigger seeds. The latest experiments with soya were designed to put these worries to rest. Dr. Long and his colleagues took the genetic troika from their tobacco experiments and inserted it into Maverick, a soya cultivar that is reasonably easy to manipulate genetically. The vagaries of such manipulation mean that the same genes added to the same plant do not always give the same result. So the researchers created a range of strains. In 2020, they planted 8 of them on the university's farm. Come harvest, they found that 5 of the 8 had significantly higher yields than unmodified plants used as controls, while those 3 showed no improvement. The average increase in yield across the 5 successes was 24.5%. The best performing strain went up by 33%. The following year, they performed the same experiment and saw no improvement. But this proved to be one of those rare cases where the notion of an exception proving the rule actually applies. The 2020 crop had higher yields because it produced more seeds. At the point when the 2021 crop was about to produce its seeds, the look of the seed pods made it appear that the same was about to happen again. But then a storm knocked the plants flat. In their new recumbent pose, the plant's leaves were piled on top of each other rather than waving free. Those above got more light all the time, those below less. None saw much by way of variation. The obvious prediction in these circumstances would be that gene modifications designed to allow leaves to handle variations in light would make no difference, and that prediction was borne out. Having prepared pods with space for a bumper crop of seeds, the plants fill them with just the normal number. Thomas Sinclair of North Carolina State University, who is skeptical about the whole idea of improving yields by increasing photosynthesis, points out that this was one small plot in one place, and that almost all of the modified plants seem to have been examined rather than a subset, as might seem more normal. Agronomists, he says, need much bigger experiments in a number of environments to be convinced. Dr. Long, who put the experiment together with his colleague Amanda D'Souza and Stephen Burgess, says the team is working on larger trials in more places. His lab is also working on editing rather than adding to the genome to achieve similar effects, and on endowing crops with other ways of increasing photosynthesis that they have found to work in tobacco. Such efforts are not restricted to soya. Rice and wheat, a crop which yield increases provided by other means have slowed over the past decades, are other possibilities. Work aimed at putting the technology into seeds of these crops and others, which can then be provided to farmers, in particular poor farmers, will be taken on by the Gates Ag One, a company owned by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which helps fund Dr. Long's lab. This is not the first time that ramping up photosynthesis has seemed to increase a crop's yield. Dr. Long points to an increase in rice yield from plants that produced more rubisco, the protein which uses the energy of photosynthesis to store carbon as organic molecules, reported in 2020 by Makimo Amani of Tohoku University and his colleagues. But the field is oddly empty, given that photosynthesis is basic to turning sunshine into calories. This is in part because most approaches to breeding plants have no way of tackling photosynthesis directly. Breeders look for practical improvements in yield and other beneficial traits. They worry less about underlying mechanisms. Most increases come from making plants better at getting the nutrients they need from the soil. Nor has this practical approach had the accidental effect of improving photosynthesis. A study published in 2016 of soya cultivars put on the market between 1923 and 2007 showed no consistent trend in photosynthetic capacity. Indeed, some researchers like Dr. Sinclair see increasing photosynthesis productivity as a red herring. No one argues that photosynthesis is as good as it could possibly be. Evolution has no interest in perfecting a single process. It simply blesses the organisms best able to survive and reproduce. Plants make endless trade-offs to those ends. How much effort to put into roots versus stalks versus leaves? How much to feed helpful fungi and bacteria in the soil? How much toxin to put into tissues to deter those who would munch on them, and so on. They have no overwhelming incentive to maximize photosynthesis simply because it underlies all the rest. That is why almost every textbook on the subject tells its readers that photosynthesis is inefficient. For a healthy wild plant to maximize the amount of sunshine it eats, it's simply a suboptimal strategy. But the same is not true for crops. Crops are not healthy plants, observes Alexander Ruban, a biophysicist at Queen Mary University of London, who works on the mechanisms Dr. Long and his colleague exploit, any more than domesticated animals are healthy animals that would flourish outside a farm. Whether animal or vegetable, farmed organisms are geared to fulfill a particular limited purpose, not to live a full and rounded life, something which is more easily accepted of a plant, say, than a pig. Increases in photosynthetic capacity, which would be irrational for a wild plant, make perfect sense in a crop, because crops live for people, not themselves. And if better photosynthesis means that they can live for and feed the lives of more people than before, that is to the good. Okay, so that's the first one. Now, the second one I'm going to read is called How to Preserve Secrets in a Quantum Age. And I'm reading this because our grandson has just started in graduate school at Duke and is going to be working in quantum computing. So not having any idea what that means, I thought I should learn a little bit about it, and this seemed an opportunity. And I had him read it, and he seemed to think it was a reasonable statement of some of the things he's going to be doing. You need new, and the subheading for this one is, you need new mathematical ideas, some of which have just been standardized. Okay. It is not often that a bit of mind-bending mathematics can avert disaster, but researchers at America's National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, have done their bit last week. After years of analysis, they gave their stamp of approval to some equations that might in time save untold petabytes of sensitive data from prying eyes. The existing encryption standards that underpin just about every online exchange of information are a bit of gnarly mathematics designed to be well-nigh impossible for today's computers to crack without just the right arithmetical key. But NIST scientists have not been pondering today's machines. They worry about a coming age of quantum computers. These exploit the weirdness of the quantum world to perform calculations in a fundamentally different ways from those used by conventional computers. This confers an enormous theoretical advantage in a small number of problem types, including identifying a large number's prime factors, numbers divisible only by themselves and one that can be multiplied together to obtain the number in question, and computing the properties of points on functions called elliptic curves. Both are widely used in cryptography. RSA, an algorithm based on factorization, is employed alongside elliptic curve cryptography in most internet connections and in virtual private networks, messaging services including WhatsApp and Signal, and the anonymizing web browser Tor. Yet both would crumble against a sufficiently advanced quantum computer running Shor's algorithm, developed in 1994 by Peter Shor, an American mathematician. Storing up trouble. Exactly when this threshold will be reached is an open question, but progress seems to be accelerating. Some of the world's largest firms and a blossoming array of plucky startups and university spin-offs are working on the hardware, the actual computers, the error correction to provide fidelity, and the software, algorithms tuned to exploit quantum computers' computational edge. The likelihood that building them will prove impossible, impractical, or too expensive now seems small. That means a cryptographically relevant quantum machine is probably coming, and old defenses will fall. A survey of experts conducted in 2021 found a majority believe that by 2036, RSA 2048, an existing industry standard encryption protocol that makes use of keys 2048 bits long could be broken within 24 hours. This means the future development of quantum computers has worrying implications today. The most pressing threats come from harvest now, decrypt later attacks, in which the encrypted data are collected en masse for quantum decryption when technology permits. Though little of today's internet chatter is likely to interest a hacker from, say, 2040, plenty of data, medical records, national security communications, or technical details of long-lived infrastructure might retain their value until then. And data sent around willy-nilly today on an assumption of impregnability need not be strategically relevant to hackers for them to pose an embarrassment or risk to the businesses or officials who were doing the sending. Colin Sutar, Managing Director at Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory, a consulting firm, draws an analogy to the millennium bug. This was expected to cause chaos when computers with software that encoded years as two-digit values passed the turn of the millennium from 99 to 00 and suddenly went back a century. Though it came to be viewed later as a tempest in a teacup, it was only diligent upgrading of the world's software that prevented digital disasters. The analogy is not perfect. In the build-up to Y2K, as the Millennium Bug Scare was also known, the scale of the problem was unclear, but the timeline was certain. For Y2Q, as the quantum doomsday is sometimes called, the situation is reversed. In both cases, though, the message is the same: act now or pay later. One path forward would be to use quantum-powered defenses against a quantum-powered attack, deploying what is known as quantum key distribution. That, though, requires expensive kit and dedicated connections. Governments and large companies might manage that, but smaller fry would find it hard. A more promising approach would be to identify new classes of mathematical problems that even quantum machines would struggle to crack. This was NIST's task. In 2016, it launched a competition to find worthy algorithms for post-quantum cryptography, PQC, receiving 82 submissions from 25 countries. After 3 rounds of sifting and valiant searches for vulnerabilities by independent cryptographers, 4 winning techniques and 4 backup approaches have emerged. The winners were all developed by consortia of academia and commercial researchers, and all, as you might expect, involve melon-twisting mathematics, best left to the experts. One called Kyber, the brainchild of a group called Crystals, Cryptographic Suite for Algebraic Lattices, the name refers to abstruse groupings in number theory, is for general encryption. The remaining 3 propose digital signatures, which will allow senders to verify their identity reliably. 2 also use lattices, crystals, dilithium and falcum, fast Fourier lattice-based compact signatures over NTRU, an acronym that allegedly stands for Number Theorists Are Us. The 4th winner was Sphinx Plus. It won in part because it does not use algebraic lattices and is therefore valuable if that approach should fail in the field. Its mode of encryption is based on hash functions, a mathematical technique often used in data compression, and NIST has 4 more options waiting in the wings that will be subject to a 4th round of examination. All of them use different mathematical concepts, again, to provide the uncrackability. Coding the winning algorithms into practical software is expected to take until 2024, according to Dustin Moody, who led the competition. Brian Lamacchia, head of security and cryptography team at Microsoft Research, worries that people will not start the PQC transition early enough. The White House, though, issued National Security Memorandum in May, telling federal agencies to gird for a cryptographic transition and directing NIST to encourage the private sector to do likewise. The sense of threat is rising. Mr. Sutar says companies have already started approaching Deloitte with an eye to keeping themselves secure. OI, another consulting firm, also stresses now is the time to PQC. To this end, both have formed partnerships with Sandbox AQ, a spin-out from Alphabet, which hopes to commercialize post-quantum cryptography and is chaired by Eric Schmidt, one of Google's former bosses. After 5 years in stealth mode, these partnerships were announced publicly in March. They are not alone. Mount Sinai Health System, a medical organization in New York that runs 8 hospitals and has 43,000 employees, is another of Sandbox AQ's clients. As Kristen Myers, Mount Sinai's chief information officer, observes, the release of confidential patient data held by the organization will constitute an existential event. With Sandbox AQ's help, she hopes to avoid that threat. It is, of course, possible that some of the NIST algorithms will themselves be cracked. But though the new post-quantum algorithms come with no guarantee, neither do today's. Peter Schwab, a cryptographer at the Max Planck Institute for Security and Privacy in Germany, who was involved in the development of Kyber, Sphinx Plus, and dilithium, therefore reckons the future lies in a hybrid approach. Rather than jettison existing encryption, he proposes retaining the algorithms currently in use and adding another post-quantum level. Belt, then, as well as braces, always an advisable tactic if you do not want to get caught with your trousers down. So that's it. Those are the two pieces from The Economist, and I don't know if what we've learned, but it's sort of always fun to see what the good things and the progress that's being made, and to learn about the inventiveness of the human spirit, which seems to survive despite the sort of all the other things that they do to each other. Right? So thank you. And thank you.